intrinsic motivation to take the steps that I'm going to talk about today. So on that note, can you go to the next slide, please? So this is all the stuff I'm going to get into, right? Self-awareness, emotional regulation, and then some other stuff on the next slide. But before we dig into this, I want you to understand the idea of a happiness baseline, because I'm going to talk about that a couple different times here. And when I say happiness baseline, what I mean is that every day when you wake up and everything is as you think it should be, right? Cars working, family's fine, you're healthy, got your job, things are looking good. There is a default level of happiness that you feel. Say on a scale of 0 to 10, your happiness baseline might be a 5 or a 6 or a 7. For some people, it's a 2 or a 3. And I've always said that a 0, if you're at a 0, those people are the ones who are at risk of dying by suicide. And so we've had these programs where we try to prevent suicide. And so maybe if you're falling down that continuum and you're at a 1 or a 1.5, we can institute these programs to save you so that you don't die by suicide. But in the event of that occurrence, if you don't die by suicide, but you remain miserable or you remain depressed, we're not winning. I don't want you to just be living and breathing. I want you to thrive. And that's why you have to believe that you deserve to be happy so that you can also choose to thrive. And so I'm going to talk about your happiness baseline. What I want you to be able to do is on that scale of 0 to 10, I want you to be able to move towards 10. If you're a 1 or a 2 or a 5 or a 6, whatever your happiness baseline is, I want you to move in the direction of being happier. And when I say being happier, understand I'm not talking about you just always have a smile on your face, right? You have to have more moods. You will enjoy being happy more if you experience other emotions as well. So what I want you to understand is that depression, the opposite of depression is not happiness. The opposite of depression is vitality. You see, depressed people also feel happy some of the time, but they often struggle feeling fully alive. So when I talk about being happy, I talk about you living a full life that you're proud of and that you enjoy daily to the point that enjoying your life is a routine and it's part of who you are. And so what I'm going to dig into first is emotional intelligence. And when I talk about taking steps to elevate your happiness baseline, you cannot do that if you do not have emotional intelligence. And it starts with self-awareness. So self-awareness, the foundation is what you feel, why you feel that way, and also how you express or experience that emotion. So what I want you to do, take a couple seconds and think about a single word to describe how you feel right now. For some people, that word is happy. For some people, that word is sad, frustrated. I've heard overwhelmed. I can tell you the word for me is gratitude. I feel grateful because I've gone through a lot of things in my life. And throughout all of those things, I've come out happy, healthy, with my family intact. And I appreciate that daily. But you need to be able to understand what you feel and why you feel that way so that you can do something about it. You have to be able to label something and recognize it, just like even doing analysis, right? If you're looking at, if your briefing is that something happened, if you don't know what that something is, the briefing has no value. You need to understand what you're talking about. And when we talk about how you feel, there's other things to consider in self-awareness, including your motivations, strengths, weaknesses, biases, and triggers. And what I mean by that is you have to understand that the way that you perceive an event is the primary cause of why you feel a certain way about the event. Lots of scientific research and data has shown that only 10% of your happiness level is based on the actual event. 50% is genetic, 40% is your response. And your response to an event, whether emotional, physical, mental, your response is based on, quite often, your motivations, strengths, weaknesses, biases, and triggers. What I want to do is I want to give you an example about how some of your biases can impact your emotions around an event. So, for example, I'm going to talk about confirmation bias, which is where you look at specifically data that confirms biases you already have. Impact bias is when you think something has more impact than it really does. And negativity bias is when you tend to focus more and give more attention to the negative aspects of something as opposed to the positive aspects. So imagine that you have a meeting. Suppose you have a meeting on Microsoft Teams, right? And you've been believing that you are substandard because you're at home, because you can't do the things you normally do. It's a different environment. You've been struggling, and you honestly think that you're just not doing a good job. So you have this meeting, you show up late, and you're embarrassed. You're embarrassed because you showed up to a meeting and you can't even blame traffic. What it took for you to get to the meeting was literally walking from the kitchen to the bedroom or the office. And so you're hard on yourself. And confirmation bias, you say, me being late confirms that I'm not a good leader, I'm not a good airman. And then impact bias, you think, well, because I'm late, everyone's going to know for sure that I'm not good at this. And then the negativity bias, you focus on the fact that you were late. You don't focus on your strengths, what you bring to the meeting, the things that you've accomplished. You're focused on that one thing because you choose to focus on negativity. So those are your biases impacting your own perception of the event, and that's impacting your emotions. And so what happens is all of these things impact the way that you view yourself. And all of us have a gap. We all have our real selves and our ideal self. Essentially, there is who or what you think you should be, and there's who you really are. And we're always trying to close the gap. And so there's often choices for people where you can either focus on the gap, focus on your imperfections, or focus on your strengths, focus on the real self. What are you good at? What have you accomplished? And so you have to choose. You have to make a conscious decision. Do I choose to be happy, to support myself, to focus on the positive, or do I choose to look at the negative? And so understanding that is the basis of your self awareness. And with self awareness, you can begin to regulate your emotions. So, this emotional intelligence information I'm giving you is based off of Dr. Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence, that came out in 1995. And these are the first two domains of his emotional intelligence model. And so, emotion regulation, as defined in 1998 by Dr. James Gross of Stanford University, he said emotion regulation is a process by which individuals influence which emotions they have, when they have them, and how they experience and express their emotions. And so when I'm talking about emotions, there are four primary emotions: anger, sadness, happiness, and fear. And of course, there's definitely a cross there between self-awareness and emotion regulation. So when I'm talking about the four primary emotions, I want you to take a moment to think about maybe the last week, and of those four emotions, which one have you felt most often? And so maybe you don't always do that level of appraisal. Maybe you don't think, wow, last week I've been angrier than I'm used to. But what I want you to think about is which of those four you would rather feel most often? And what can we do about that? And so there's lots of different ways to regulate emotion, but I'm going to talk about the process model of emotion regulation. And I'm going to use our example of being late to a meeting to just walk you through that process model of emotion regulation. So the first thing that happens with emotion regulation is there's an event or a stimulus. And so what happens is you see on the left there, situation, selection, or modification. What we're saying is the truth is lots of things happen all at once. And you choose where you're going to focus your attention. So situation selection is you selecting which event you're going to react to. And of course, sometimes you don't have a choice because a certain event is in your face, right? And it demands your attention. But after that happens, you deploy attention. You choose to look, you choose to put your effort and resources into that. And then there's cognitive reappraisal. So cognitive reappraisal is saying that you have a choice in how you interpret what happened. You have a choice to modify your reaction. And then at the end there, you see the response focused. So I'm going to talk about there for a minute. I'm going to dig into that a little bit more. Is it says suppression on there, and the reason it did that, it was because this course that I took this from talked about how emotion suppression is actually a negative thing. It's a bad thing for you. And what I mean by that is, we say all the time, control your emotions, don't let your emotions control you. When we say that, it doesn't mean to do not feel. It does not mean to suppress your emotions. What it means is that you choose what you feel, and you influence how you feel these emotions and how you experience and express them. Research has shown that if you suppress negative emotions, you will have a harder time feeling positive emotions as well. So you need to fully feel emotions, especially the hard ones, to heal from those emotions. And when you embrace those emotions, then you're better able to deal with them. And then you can be resilient and bounce back and elevate your happiness baseline, return to default. Um, so one way that this has been described, for those of you that were in the you've seen the resilience training from the past couple of years, not last year, but up to 2018, there was this thing called the ABC model. Well, I've seen it described as the ABCD model. So it's the same as this process model, but it's, you have the activating event. A B is the belief. So what beliefs do you bring to the event? And then C are the consequences. What are the consequences? What are the reactions, physical and emotional, to the activating event based on your belief? And so in our meeting example, you believe that you were a subpar airman. The activating event is that you showed up late. You have those negative beliefs about yourself based largely on your confirmation, impact, and negativity bias. And then the consequence is you're in a bad mood, you feel bad about yourself, you're feeling depressed, you're feeling angry about yourself, almost um, feeling guilty. And so the D in the ABCD model is dispute. And what that means is to recognize that you have these negative physical and emotional reactions, and you dispute the data that contributed to that. Meaning that you look at that meeting that you were late to and you think to yourself, you know what? People are late to these things all the time. A lot of meetings that I've been late to, other people have been later than me, and someone else is making jokes, and they just don't start on time. So you being late is not even a big deal. Then during the meeting, you brought something of substance to the meeting. You had an idea, you had demonstrated initiative, you're proactive, you're meeting suspenses, you're getting things done. So you choose to focus on what you've done as opposed to being late. So you dispute the belief, you dispute the consequence that you're a subpar airman, and you recognize your wins, you focus on your strengths, and that is regulating your emotions. And that is something that takes practice. Understand, when I tell you about these things, you're not going to just be able to go in and immediately implement these ideas into your life automatically and without practice, right? You don't just perfect anything on the first day. It takes practice. Um, and so the more you practice emotion regulation, the better you're going to get at emotion regulation. Next slide, please. And so the next thing I want to talk about is subjective well-being. So you have to have self-awareness and emotion regulation to be able to practice PERMA. So PERMA comes from positive psychology by Dr. Martin Seligman, the same one who developed the resilience program in even the comprehensive soldier fitness program in 2008 and 9. So Dr. Martin Seligman developed this. And so just looking at these things, positive emotions, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. Each of these elements should be sought on their own independently of the other elements. So what I mean by that is you seek positive emotions regardless of anything else going on in your life. You want to have positive relationships regardless of the four elements. And each of these happen quantitatively. And for example, you want to have more positive emotions. The more often that you feel positive emotions, the happier you'll be. And there are lots of different positive emotions you can feel, from gratitude, joy, happy surprises, the feeling of awe. There's lots of positive emotions you can feel, and you should intentionally attempt to cultivate those positive emotions regularly. And one way that you can do that is to manage your positive to negative ratio. For example, every time you have a negative thought or you make a negative statement, balance that with 3 or 4 positive statements. There should be more positivity and optimism coming from you than negativity. Engagement is to engage your strengths. And that's where I go back to self awareness and knowing your strengths and weaknesses. So there's this concept called flow. And flow is when you're in a state where you lose track of time, you lose track of the amount of energy expended, and you're in a flow state where you feel like you're fully engrossed in all areas of your life in this singular event. That happens when you engage your strengths. The more often you engage your strengths, the happier you'll be. And it can be anything. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the VIA Signature Strength Survey. So VIA stands for Values in Action, and the website is viacharacter.org. But what it does is it has a survey you can take that just lists your strengths, 24 signature strengths in order. And there's lots of different things like bravery, honesty, humor, love of learning, appreciation of art and beauty. So the more often you do that, the happier you'll be. For example, if you love art, then you should practice art more. Whether it's playing an instrument, learning a new instrument, painting, drawing, something of that, engage your strengths more often. What I'm really telling you is to do what you love more often. That's not even some new concept, but understand that in order for you to do what you love more often, you have to believe that you deserve to be happy. Otherwise, it'll be difficult for you to engage your strengths. The R's for relationships, you see here also positive relationships. You have to have significant positive relationships, but in terms of PERMA, you have to do things to enhance those relationships more often. So, again, what I'm telling you is not something you've never thought of before. You need to do more things with and for the people you love. It's that simple. Call your parents more, call your siblings more. If you have a pet, spend more time with it. Playing with your dog. It doesn't even matter what anyone else thinks. It's your life, they're your relationships. Put more effort into enhancing your relationships. The M in permit is for meaning. You have to do things that have meaning to you, that have value to you. So, for example, even talking politics, different people have different opinions on lots of different issues. You don't want to get caught up doing something meaningless and then you feel bad about yourself for not getting involved in something that you feel like can make a difference. And it doesn't matter what your opinion is on any issue. What matters is that you're doing something that has meaning and value to you. So again, if you do things that have meaning to you more often, you'll be happier. And the last thing in PERMA, the A is for accomplishment. You have to do things that have an end state of you feeling like you've accomplished something. And I'm not saying that your happiness depends on success or failure. I'm saying that when you accomplish something, you need to savor the moment, acknowledge your effort, respect your journey, respect your goals, right? If your goals were easy, they wouldn't be worth accomplishing in the first place. So don't spend time looking at where you should be, spend more time savoring where you are, and then create more goals that align with your values and accomplish those. So, big picture for PERMA, what I'm about to say to you, I'm sure you've all thought of before more than once. Understand that you have to believe and know that you deserve to be happy to institute this in your life. What you should do is you should engage your strengths with people that are important to you and accomplish something that has meaning to you and the other people in these relationships and cultivate positive emotions while you're doing it. Do things you love with people you love. That's PERMA. The more often you do that, the more you elevate your happiness baseline. The more you elevate your happiness baseline, the more resilient you are, the more you're able to handle the different things that come your way, such as hurricane season, which I don't really worry about. I'm up in Fort Meade, Maryland. Um, so I want you to be more resilient. I want you to have self awareness, regulate your emotions, and recognize that you can choose to elevate your happiness baseline. And it's easier to do if you believe that you deserve to be happy.